Brahmachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnu Padma Mahamsa Parirajagacharya Ashtadashata Shishimat His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnu Padma Mahamsa Parirajagacharya Ashtadashata Shishimat His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. All glories to the Summa devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Summa devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Summa devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Can somebody pull this up? Please. Somebody with an iPhone. Anybody with an iPhone? I have an iPhone, but I need to use it. Rishi has it. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, text number 49. I guess, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, Bhagavatam 3, 5, 49. Yavad Balim Te Aja Harama Kale Yata Vayam Cha Anam Adama Yatra Yatha Upayesham Te Ime Hi Lokaha Balim Harantaha Anam Adanti Anuhaha. Really? Is it? Oh, it has me on 49 for the schedule. Go to the translation. Really? Look at the translation? Yeah, we did. Oh, we did, huh? Okay. Okay, text 50. Anyway, we'll just read text 50. Tvam nasuranam masi sanvayanam kutastha adyaf purushaf puranaha Tvam deva shaktyam gunakarma yono retastvajayam kavim adadhejaha Tvam nasuranam masi sanvayanam kutastha adyaf purushaf puranaha Tvam deva shaktyam gunakarma yonau retastvajayam kavim adadhejaha Tvam nasuranam masi sanvayanam kutastha adyaf purushaf puranaha Tvam deva shaktyam gunakarma yono retastvajayam kavim adadhejaha. Please chant. Mataji? Your lordship, Naha, of us, Suranam, of the demigods, Asi, you are, Saanvayanam, with different gradations, Kutastaha, one who is unchanged, Adyaha, without any superior, Purushaha, the founder person, Puranaha, the oldest, who has no other founder. Dvam, you, Deva, O Lord, Shaktyam, unto the energy, Guna Karma Yono, unto the cause of the material modes and activities. Retasaha, semen of birth. Tu, indeed. Ajayam, for beginning. Kavim, the total living entities. Adate, initiated. Ajaha, one who is unborn. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. You are the original founder person of all the demigods and the orders of different gradations. Yet you are the oldest and are unchanged. O Lord, you have no source or superior. You have impregnated the external energy with the semen of the total living entities, yet you are unborn. The Lord, the original person, is the father of all other living entities, beginning from Brahma, the personality from whom all other living entities in different gradations of species are generated. Yet the Supreme Father has no other father. Every one of the living entities Every one of the living entities of all grades, up to Brahma, the original creature of the universe, is begotten by a father, but he, the Lord, has no father. When he descends on the material plane, out of his causeless mercy, he accepts one of his great devotees as his father to keep pace with the rules of the material world. But since he is the Lord, he is always independent in choosing who will become his father. For example, the Lord came out of a pillar in his incarnation as Nrsimhadev, and by the Lord's causeless mercy, Ahalya came out of a stone by the touch of his lotus feet, by the touch of the lotus feet of his incarnation as Lord Sri Rama. He is also the companion of every living entity as the supersoul, but he is unchanged. The living entity changes his body in the material world, but even when the Lord is in the material world, he is ever unchanged. That is his prerogative. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord impregnates the external or material energy, and thus the total living entities later come out in different gradations, beginning from Brahma, the first demigod, down to the insignificant ant. All gradations of living entities are manifested by Brahma and the external energy, but the Lord is the original father of everyone. The relationship of every living being with the Supreme Lord is certainly one of son and father, and not one of equality. Sometimes, in love, the son is more than the father, but the relationship of the father and son is one of the superior and subordinate. Every living entity, however great he may be, even up to the demigods like Brahma and Indra, is an eternally subordinate servitor of the Supreme Father. The Mahatattva principle is the generating source of all the modes of material nature, and the living entities take birth in the material world in bodies supplied by the mother, material nature, in terms of their previous work. The body is a gift of material nature, but the soul is originally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakya Chakshuru Unmilitamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupa Kadahmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Padakamalam Shri Guru and Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parajana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Shah He Krishna Kurna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusite Devi Pranama Mahare Pare Vanshakaputu Vyashta Kripasando Vyevacha Patita Nam Pavane Pyo Vaishnavi Pyo Namo Nama Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtai Putrishmate Bhakti Vikasa Swami Itinamane Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtai Putrishmate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Itinamane Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Prasharne Nirvishesha Shunavadi Pashchati Deshtarane Putir Mahadbiri Mafpur Vigor Nirmaya Shatid Amushpurashaha Punkte Gunan Shurashasho Shatmakasarang Shishta Bhagaman Shamsime. Translation: You are the original personal founder of all the demigods and the orders of the different gradations. Yet, you are the oldest and unchanged. O Lord, you have no source or superior. You have impregnated the external energy with the semen of the total living entities, yet you are unborn. So, the demigods, this is quite a long set of prayers. I thought they were shorter than this, but they're quite long. So, the demigods, they're almost finished. They're offering prayers to Narayan, because, as is stated in a previous verse, they were given certain duties to perform, certain universal duties, and they couldn't perform it. So they're offering prayers fascinating prayers to the Lord, with the hopes of being empowered to be able to do their respective duties, which is proper, it's fine. It's quite nice, actually. I wasn't speaking towards the beginning, but in the beginning it's very nice. It talks about how, specifically, there's around 4 to 5 prayers that directly glorify the lotus feet of Krishna, and the Sanskrit is very beautiful. And now here, actually even before the verse yesterday, and I think the day before that, it's getting a little more technical, and it's talking about the creation. Often prayers in the Bhagavatam, if you see, at least that I've noticed, they somehow hit on the point of creation, and the process of glorifying is interesting. It started off as glorifying the lotus feet of the Lord, and then it goes on to glorify His creation. So, many prayers in the Bhagavatam do this. You see, for example, in the 10th canto, 2nd chapter, prayers by the demigods again. They do that. Shukadev Goswami also does that. He begins by doing that in the second canto, fourth chapter, we learn those prayers. I forget the first verse of it. Brahma Samhita, similarly to, is very common shrin. So here, they're glorifying using different words. I'm just looking at the Sanskrit. All the different things. Within the Sanskrit itself, for example, we have this kutasta. Kuta means like a mountain, just like we have anakuta. Kuta means mountain, and then sta means like, it means different things, but here it means fixed. Generally, sta refers to like a location, a place, or the fact that it's fixed in one position. Just like we have stanam stitaha, like that verse is there. So kutasta means like fixed like a mountain, unchanged. Srila Prabhupada renders it here. So the Lord doesn't change, even though He's the personal founder of all the demigods. Krishna is the founder acharya of all the demigods and all the different orders. Yet He Himself, He doesn't have a source, despite being the source of everything. We may take this for granted and make it seem kind of obvious to us, but at least I've met many people. It seems quite hard for people to accept this point, particularly atheists. If you explain to them a common question, not just even atheists, many people have this concern of God. Who created God? But the thing is, God doesn't have a source. Krishna doesn't have a source. It's stated here, this word is used, his name, Aja, one who is unborn. He was never born. He doesn't have a birth. He does have a birth, but he doesn't have a birth. He seemingly has a birth, but he doesn't actually take birth. There's one verse, Kunti Maharani, she prays. Let me see. She has a few verses about Krishna being unborn, but let me see if I can get that. Well, there's one here that's actually relevant to Janma karma cha vishvatman ajasya kartu atmanah thirya nrishisu yadasu tat atyanta vinam. This is, I can pull it up. First canto, chapter 8, she glorifies Krishna, directly Krishna. She says, of course it is bewildering, O soul of the universe, that you work, though you are inactive, and that you take birth, though you are the vital force and the unborn. You yourself descend among animals, men, sages, and aquatics. Verily, this is bewildering. So Krishna has no particular cause for coming. He has no particular cause. He's not particularly forced to make the demigods appear, or even, of course, we understand that living entities that come to this material world because they want to enjoy separately from Krishna. We know this. But Krishna he's not forced to allow the living entities to do that. He's not forced to create the material world. He does it out of his own sweet will. Srila Prabhupada uses the word. So similarly, everything Krishna does, he's not forced by any other cause. So Krishna is creating the demigods, his founding of the demigods, with the different orders of the demigods and the different orders of gradations. He doesn't particularly have a cause. In one sense, he has a cause. In another sense, he doesn't. It's causeless. So similarly, too, although he sets all of this into motion, he himself is unmoved, the unmoved mover. He's the oldest and unchanged. Despite acting unlike living entities in this world, when conditioned souls act, we generate some sort of karma, unless we're in Krishna consciousness. But Krishna, there's this word, guna karma yono. He doesn't have any guna and he doesn't have any karma. He doesn't have any material qualities and he doesn't have any material karma. But he does have divine activities and divine qualities and divine activities, just like we have this, how does that go? Janma karma chame divyam. Divyam, divya karma, divine activities, transcendental activities. So here, he's described as Purusha Puranaha. He's the oldest person, yet he's also the youngest. We find in Brahma Samhita. He can also literally be the youngest, but he's ever young, he's ever youthful, despite being the oldest person. And he is the cause of the material modes of activities. He sets the entire material universe into motion, and he impregnates the material universe with living entities because of their desire to lord it over the material universe. So, Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he hits on a few points, a few that stuck out to me. Let me see. Yeah, so speaking what I was talking about before, out of his causeless mercy when Krishna comes to this world, or any not just Krishna, also his avatars, incarnations, etc. He accepts, out of his causeless mercy, he accepts one of his great devotees as his father to keep and mother, to keep pace with the rules of the material world. So, out of his causeless mercy, Krishna comes to this world, and being even more merciful, out of love for his devotees, he accepts some devotees as his father, mother, and also relatives like that. And he enjoys loving relationships with them. And all species of life is like this. So, and he keeps pace with the rules of the material world. Means two different things. Here, Prabhupada means obviously that to just act as if he is under the rules of the material world. Generally, when living entities appear in the material world, they have a source. They have a father, they have a mother, or something of that accord. Some only have one in terms of like plants or things like that, different things like that. But they have some sort of source. So Krishna, keeping pace with these rules, keeping pace with the so-called etiquette of this world, he also accepts similarly. Not just that, we see, therefore Kunti also in her prayers, she also glorifies Krishna that is bewildering that you take birth among I read that amongst human beings, animals, aquatics, etc., all species of life. And among those species of life, Krishna acts to a degree in accordance with those rules of those species of life. We see when he descends as Matsya, for instance, he swims like a fish. He looks like a fish. He may eat what a fish eats. I don't know. I don't have information. But he swims like a fish. He doesn't particularly walk on land. But he's not forced to swim. He so chooses to swim. So he voluntarily conforms to whatever sort of situation he so desires. Just like we see so many examples. When Krishna was in this world, he conformed to not only the so-called behavior of a human being, he conformed to societal rules, etiquette. We see Krishna, for example, worshiping Sudama Brahmana, for example, receiving him very nicely. We see Krishna touching the feet of his parents, worshiping Guru, etc., respecting Sandipani Muni, his teacher, etc., like this. So Krishna also conforms to the rules and regulations, or etiquette, I guess you can say, of human society. So similarly to, and even maybe more so, Lord Rama, he did it even to a greater extent, conforming to the rules of society and setting a perfect example. Because otherwise, if he didn't, particularly within human society, things would be very chaotic. Because as great men do, common men follow, Krishna speaks, but he's talking about himself, actually. Although it's a universal principle that however great men in society act, the common men follow that. Specifically for Krishna, or the Supreme Lord, as he himself says is very important for him. So he sets these examples for others when he takes birth when he descends into society amongst all species of life. When he comes as Lord Krishna, specifically as the Lord Rama, he's an ideal king, ideal human being. He's showing ideal family life, ideal everything. So similarly too, when he's, of course, it's not always the case, but we see too when he's and his incarnations amongst the demigods, for example, he's also showing those qualities. He simultaneously, his potency is such that he creates the demigods, and then he also appears amongst the demigods. Not only does he appear amongst the demigods in one incarnation, he appears amongst them in many different incarnations, in different forms of incarnations. Of course, we have Vamana himself, which is directly the Supreme Lord. Then we have Shakti-Avesh avatars as well. Devarshi Narada, for instance, who is among Devarshi, a sage amongst the demigods. He's a Shakti-Avesh avatar. He's also, in one sense, an expansion of Krishna. So Krishna expands in many different ways. He expands the demigods, and then he expands himself amongst the demigods. So, yeah. And then Srila Prabhupada, he continues, he's always, despite doing these things, despite appearing despite appearing in a certain circumstance and following certain rules, Krishna is never bound by those rules, and his incarnations are never bound by those rules. Although Lord Ram, he followed all the rules and regulations, many different rules of etiquette, behavior, etc. like that. He didn't have to. Nobody forced him to. He so desired to do so. Although Lord Nrsimhadev appeared out of a pillar because of Hiranyakashipu's breaking it, more specifically, Prahlad's devotion, specifically, Nrsimhadev didn't have to do so. Only strictly out of love for his devotee did he choose to do so. So, also, he's the companion of every living entity as the supersoul, yet he remains unchanged. We've covered this. So, the living entity changes while in the material world, but the Lord, even while in the material world, he is ever unchanged. That is prerogative, even though it looks like he changes. Philosophically, we can understand that he doesn't change, but it looks like he changes. If you see his pastimes, there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's Adi Lila, there's Madhya Lila, and then there's Antya Lila. Even Lord Chaitanya's life, if you look at that, for example, he was a boy, then he grew up, and then he became around, I think, 48 is when he left this world, disappeared, something like that. So something like middle-aged, I guess you could literally say. So it looks like his form has changed. Similarly, we have pictures of Krishna too. Krishna as a baby, Krishna as Kaishora, as a youth, as then he maxes out at, I think, 16 years of age, basically. I mean, he gets older than that. He lived until 125 years old. He had his pastimes until there, and then he wound it up, but he never aged past 16 years, physically speaking, So he changes. His body changes, but he doesn't change at the same time. It's very bewildering. It's very amazing. Of course, the Lord's eternal form is that of a 15-year-old youth in Golokam Vrindavan, but he, despite these seeming changes, he never changes. He's always fixed. And Srila Prabhupada continues, hitting this point about the creation. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord impregnates the external or material energy, and thus the total living entities later come out in different gradations, beginning from Brahma, the first demigod, down to the insignificant ant. So, there's a couple different points. Srila Prabhupada is repeating the word gradations, which is coming in the Sanskrit itself, Svanya Anvayanam. So there's different grades of living entities. Krishna creates, variety is the spice of life. So Krishna's creation, the material creation, is variegated. Otherwise, there would be no enjoyment, even materially. So even amongst living entities, there's over 8 million species of life. So, and there's subdivisions among that. There's so many different forms of aquatics, so many different forms of insects, living human beings, etc., like that. Because each individual soul wants to, and even among those, even among, say, for example, the human bodies, there's so many gradations of human bodies. There's subhumans, there's civilized humans, and even amongst those gradations, there's even gradations amongst that. Amongst civilized human beings, there's different races, different classes, at least within India. Even here as well, even amongst classes, there's divisions amongst classes. For example, just like within the Brahmana community, there's so many different gradations. There's divisions of Brahmanas, and there's subdivisions of Brahmanas, like that. For example, so there's so many different gradations of living entities. The highest gradation of living entity, generally it's said to be demigods, which in one sense is true. In another sense is the Brahmanas. Brahmanas are sometimes called as demigods on earth, earthly demigods. And amongst the demigods, there's also Brahmanas. We have Brihaspati, for instance. The most exalted birth within the material world is that of the human birth, nonetheless. Even though the demigod form is the most elevated, human beings have the best chance at self-realization. Even though the demigods are aware of Lord Vishnu, or aware of his glories to some extent, just as we're reading, for example, the demigods are offering prayers to Lord Narayan, praying for empowerment, but the thing is, they have mixed motive. If you analyze the demigods' prayers throughout the Bhagavatam, there's many of them. I quoted earlier, 10th canto. Here we have some. I think there's some that come in the 6th canto, maybe some of the 8th canto. And generally, if you analyze them, they're motivated in some way. Because the demigods couldn't perform their activities, they prayed to Lord Krishna, or Lord Narayan here, for empowerment to do so, basically. They're glorifying the lotus feet of Lord Narayan, which is proper and true. Srila Prabhupada writes, in any activity, we should pray for the Lord's mercy, otherwise success can't come. But we see particularly when the demigods are troubled by something, then they approach Lord Krishna, or Narayan specifically. So the devotion is there, but the devotion is mixed, and their faith is not necessarily pure. Of course, it's not universal principle, but generally is like that. Those living entities who have enough pious credit, yet are also devotionally inclined, they take birth among the demigods. It's not that one is demoniac. In other words, like, usually such a birth comes because of some credit of devotional service. It's rare or almost impossible. For example, Ravana may have been doing, although granted he's Jai or Vijay, but his Vedic sacrifices alone won't elevate him to the status of a demigod, of a true demigod, because the real definition of a demigod is one who is a devotee of Vishnu. And one who is envious of Vishnu is known as an asura. So even if one gets a birth amongst the demigods, if he's envious of Vishnu, actually he's an asura. So, real birth as a demigod, real qualification of a demigod is this inclination towards Krishna, inclination towards the devotional service of Krishna. And the more one is inclined towards devotional service, towards bhakti, the more godly he is. Whereas the opposite is the cause of demonic qualities. We see, for example, even amongst the demigods, we have stories of, for example, of Indra in Bhagavatam, as well as other demigods, but particularly Indra gets a bad rap. We see sometimes demonic qualities manifest in Indra. As Krishna lists in the Bhagavad Gita, lust, anger, hate, greed. Sometimes he exhibits such qualities. Why? Because those godly qualities are cultivated directly in proportion to one's devotional service to Krishna. What is that? How does that verse start? Harava bhaktisya. How does that verse? Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati kinchana sarver gunas tatra samasate suraha. If one has devotional service to Krishna, then all the good qualities, all the demigods, they sit within the heart of the devotee, and all their good qualities are manifested. Otherwise, even if one has all the good qualities, so-called good qualities of the demigods, but he doesn't, he's not a devotee, those good qualities are useless. So, the demigod birth is an elevated birth, but even more elevated than a demigod birth is a human birth, because a human birth affords one the opportunity to go back home, back to God within his lifetime, within a very short span. Even if one takes birth as a demigod, he has a very long time to live out that body. Millions and millions of celestial years. Whereas a human being is very short. Sometimes it's just 20 years, sometimes less than that, sometimes 50 years, maximum around like 100 years. So it's quite short, actually. It's a small blip in life. But, so even though to us, it seems like a very long time, somebody's lived to be 100 years old, it seems very fantastic, but about the calculations of the demigods, it looks like absolutely nothing. It's just like we have, like a fruit fly, for example. They live for like 2 weeks. They take birth in 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they've gone through the whole cycle. They've grown up. They've reproduced. Their body has dwindled, and ultimately they die. So in 2 weeks, it seems like a blip to us because we live for weeks and weeks and weeks and years like that. So similarly too for the demigods, but it's a very short amount of time that's worth properly utilizing. Srila Prabhupada, he himself emphasized the importance of utilizing the human form of life, both to devotees and to the public generally, in different ways. He painted it differently. Often we hear him saying that human life is short, it can end at any time. And it's true, there's prayers like that, Mukunda Malastoja. And other places he says, he encouraged his disciples, who were then at the time young, saying, each of you have 50 years, imagine what you can do. I've done this in 10 years, you each have 50 years, imagine what you can do. So, we have quite a long time, but simultaneously we don't have so much time. So, it's important to not waste time in devotional service and Krishna consciousness, using every moment in rendering service to Krishna, however it may be, in chanting, doing practical service, not letting time go by idly. Otherwise, what can happen is a gap of millions of years. If we're so inclined to to spending our time in non-devotional activities, then so long that inclination is still there, then so long we have to remain within this material world. And yeah, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, I just read it recently, of course, he was encouraging on the theme of remaining Krishna conscious. He encouraged his disciples to chant 64 rounds every single day. And when the disciple was making the point to him that it seems almost impossible, how are we supposed to chant when we have service throughout the day, etc., like that? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur remarked to him that you have time, just stop engaging in prajalpa. The real issue is not that you have too much service to do. The real issue is you're spending your time in idle talks. Then you can chant. Then you'll be able to chant more. And it's true, actually. It's like that. A lot of time gets wasted, even within my own life. It's like that. But the more time we spend actively pursuing Krishna consciousness, the more we get benefited, actually. There's so much we can do for the mission. There's so much we can do within Krishna consciousness itself. So many extra activities we can render, extra services, extra activities in Krishna consciousness we can do. We can take up, we can learn, just as the demigods are rendering prayers here, we can learn different prayers. We can read specific sections of the Bhagavatam, that we're so inclined to. We can learn different instruments. We can learn how to cook for Krishna. There's so many things we can do within devotional service that and actually are needed within devotional service if we properly utilize time. And it's very relishable, actually. If you hear regularly Bhagavatam, if you take up these activities, if we balance our time and we spend it in a regulated way pursuing devotional service, it's very relishable, actually. In the material world, things that are regulated are just the opposite. It seems distasteful. Just like when people follow a diet, for instance, or it's a very distasteful thing to do because it feels like you're constrained. Or if you're on a strict schedule in the material world, it's very distasteful, actually. But rendering devotional service in a regulated way, Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, actually is very tasteful. Taste comes from that, actually. So, of course, we're not Paramahamsas, and the ability to not waste time, it only truly comes when we become elevated in devotional service, but we can make a regulated plan. Srila Prabhupada, he writes in the Bhagavad Gita that the yogi controls his mind according to his plan. So we can make a plan how to structure our day, how to render devotional service, and try to act according to it. Just as Brahma, for example, when creating the universe, he did it systematically. He had some sort of plan. He didn't do it whimsically. And he looked towards the Lord for mercy. So similarly, the demigods, they're trying to perform the different activities, and they're looking towards the Lord for mercy. Every living entity, however great he may be, even up to demigods like Brahma and Indra, is an eternal subordinate servitor of the Supreme Father. So we may make so many plans, and we may try to go on in devotional service like that, and all our plans may be frustrated. Sometimes we may make plans, we may make Krishna-conscious plans, and they just go to naught. Sometimes it's like that. Just as my own spiritual master, he makes the point that Srila Prabhupada was preaching in Jhansi for so long, and in one sense, absolutely nothing came out of it. I think he initiated one disciple there, but practically his whole preaching just sort of collapsed, and he was preaching there for years. Nothing came out of it, really, practically speaking. So he had a plan, he pursued it, and it just completely flopped. Because Krishna wanted it to flop, actually. At the time, it didn't make sense, but in retrospect, it was like that. So we may make plans in devotional service, but we shouldn't be so distraught when those plans go up in flames even. The real thing is not to act for the result necessarily, but to act for the pleasure of Krishna is an obvious point. Even in such activities, the same principle holds. So, So the body is a gift of material nature, but the soul is originally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So Krishna has given us this gift of the material body. He's given everybody the gift of the material body, in one sense, either in terms of letting the living entity enjoy, or at least in terms of the human life, giving it for the sake of self-realization. So Krishna has so kindly given this body to us. We have intelligence. We can use it. We're not handicapped in any way, at least those of us here. We can hear the Hare Krishna mantra. We can chant it. We can read Shastra. We can understand English enough to read Srila Prabhupada's books. So we have a very good opportunity. We may not be so highly scholarly enough to read Sanskrit or something like that, but it doesn't matter. We have this gift. We have this short time within this earthly planet. So we should utilize it properly and try to become Krishna conscious and go back home, back to Godhead. Okay? So I can end my class there and take any questions anybody has or comments at this time. Anything?
You're kind of speaking on idol talks within devotions.
Mm-hmm.
Idle talks within devotional service. It's kind of hard to gauge that, isn't it? A little bit like sometimes you kind of you speak and it begins as Krishna conscious, but then it just goes on and on and on, and at the end of it, it's like it's completely something else. Or sometimes it's seen as like an important conversation, and you begin that as an important conversation, but then a lot of it in between is like, what the heck, the most of it was not that important, or you get diverted into different talks and you start discussing different things, and instead of that same conversation taking like 15 minutes, it took like 2.5 hours, and it's like it seems really hard to like gauge that, how like. Don't say that. He's watching.
So, I don't know, there's a difficulty. I mean, we can pray to Krishna for help. That's my generic advice. It is difficult. Just like when we're, for example, just to take it from a more generic angle, we speak with devotees because we want to cultivate a relationship with them. And if the other devotee just tells us, can we only talk about Krishna? Then, okay, that's Krishna conscious, but it may not be so, paradoxically, it may not be so healthy for the relationship. I mean, we see, for example, even Srila Prabhupada, he would talk about a wide range of topics. Even my own spiritual master, he also talks about a wide range of topics. But, I mean, at least I see within my own spiritual master, which is my only point of like reference for these things, really. That he has like a certain cutoff. You can tell. I mean, you probably have experience as well. He like cuts it off like pretty quickly. He may go like tangentially, but he doesn't necessarily like go off into like. Even if he goes off, he like catches himself, something like that, So I mean, it is like a gray area. Gray areas are sometimes indefinitely gray areas, but sometimes the gray area, there's a gradation from like a white area to like a black area. In between is the gray area. So when you get to the black area, then maybe it's like a time to like cut it off. I mean, at least in terms of, yeah. I mean, there's different sorts of things you can discuss. There's different sorts of prajalpas. Yeah, there's so many different things. One thing, our acharyas have given instructions about this specifically. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he has some comments about this. He has a commentary in the Nectar instruction. You could check that out. I remember some of the points, for example. Yeah, I mean, just see how conducive is the conversation towards devotional service is a general principle. And it may not be so clear. Just like, for example, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that in defining prajalpa, amongst the different definitions, he says that when a devotee is working in the material world, he has some job, and he has to associate with karmis, and so in the course of working, he has to naturally have to speak with karmis. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that sort of talk actually is not prajalpa, actually, interestingly enough. So that's one thing to do, consulting different acharyas, as there's many different instructions on this, actually. But just in general, I mean, there's one thing. Idle talks are like one thing, and that's quite obvious. In terms of like not letting a conversation go on too long, I'm inspired by Jayadvaita Maharaj, who has a tendency just to like cut a conversation off. He can like immediately recognize when like the horse has been beat and the horse is dead, and the conversation is just beating the dead horse again and again and again, and he just tends to cut it off there. So sometimes we may be discussing something, and we may have concluded something in the conversation half an hour ago, but it's just going on like that, analyzing. So that's one thing. Generally, just analyzing, at least I find practical, is just seeing how senior devotees act. Senior devotees with like good devotional standing, how are they treating it? How do they speak? Just like Arjuna asked Krishna, what does a transcendently situated person do? How does he walk? How does he speak? So similarly, too, if you see elevated personalities, we can kind of like learn from that. That's my own understanding when it comes, because it's like a practical question, so seeing practical examples is very much helpful. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Anything else? For the men? Mataji's, anything? There's some questions over there. 2 questions.
I have 2, but they're brief. The first one, you were speaking about how, like, Krishna, him, like, being born and unborn is, like, inconceivable.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's inconceivable, but I'm just wondering, now that I'm thinking about it, like, what is it that's consistent? Is it, like, his qualities, his personality? Like, what, like, what is that that's always, like, unchanging?
Yeah, his qualities don't change. His personality, nothing changes about him, actually. I mean, that's what it is. It doesn't make sense. It looks like they change. It looks like Krishna acts differently when he's a boy than when he becomes a young adult or teenager, I guess. It looks like he's changed. It looks like his qualities have changed. And in a sense, they have changed. Another sense, they haven't changed at all. That's the amazing thing about Krishna. And this is where it's like, I can't give a philosophical explanation because it's just inconceivable. Krishna is like that. He has contradictory qualities. Just like he's infinitely big but infinitely small. How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. At the same time, he has a fixed form. He's a certain height. He has a specific height. So all things are there. So similarly, too, he changes in one sense, but he doesn't change at the same time. The universal creation, in one sense, is nothing more than Krishna, in one sense, but it changes. So in one sense, even in that sense, Krishna changes very grossly, but in another sense, Krishna doesn't change at all. So I can't...
They display different qualities according to also like the pastime.
That's true. That's one good point. Just like, for example, we see like a pastimer is running. It seems like his pastimes, his lila is changing, but actually it's not changing. The example is given just like the sun is rising and setting. So his pastimes are just going on like that. That's a very good, actually, yeah. So those qualities are there, but he just exhibits them differently. We see in the Nectar of Devotion, sometimes there's contradictory qualities there. So he can manifest or unmanifest those qualities proportionally according to which he desires. So, yeah. Is it like an add-on? Because we have... Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Because of our experiences that generally like that we acquire qualities in this world. Like, we grow up
Mm-hmm.
and then we learn something and then
That's true, yeah.
Krishna's like, is the reservoir of all these qualities. So he has them all and it's just according to the pastime and the pleasure of his devotees and how he wants to enjoy, he exhibits those. So it looks like change to us, but it's actually he has all of those things already. So it's just that's probably like where it's getting a little bit confused.
Mm-hmm.
Might be some
That's true. That's very true. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, like it's all of these different qualities and contradictory things are there, but Krishna's just manifested and unmanifested at different times.
To put it in practical terms, just like we have baby Krishna, so there's a certain rasa associated with that. He's very cute. He's very sweet. He's very mischievous. Well, Krishna as a youth is also cute, sweet, and mischievous, but just in a slightly different way, and those baby qualities are retracted. In other words, it's different aspects of the same quality. So, and sometimes he manifests certain aspects, sometimes he doesn't. So, like that. You have something else? There's a second.
Yeah, the last question is just, you were mentioning about the 8,400,000 species of life and how there's gradations in it. So are those gradations included in that number, or are they not?
Well, to some extent, the limit of obviously Brahmanas and things like these, my understanding, no. I haven't seen a subdivision so clear. The actual thing for the Padma Purana, where this number comes from, how it subdivides it is there's like, for example, amongst human beings, there's certain like subhumans, I guess you could say, uncivilized human beings, and then there's civilized human beings, which constitute the like bulk of the chunk of human beings. So further subdivisions, exactly how those are counted up, I would say no, just from the amount of, I mean, practically speaking, how many divisions there are, even on this earthly planet. And there's human beings elsewhere within the universe as well, within other islands of Jambudweep, etc., like that. So I would say no, not in terms of like so specific like social positions, but like that. So, okay, I think Maji also had something I could take. before we end? No? Nothing? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.